Why is memory so important for us human beings? Anyone want to just say something about memory? Yeah.
I think memory is pretty important to every person's life experience, because with our memories, we are the people that we are, and I think if we had different ones, if we all have the same ones, if we didn't have them, or if we all have the same ones, life would be bland and boring.
Yeah.
So I think memories, good and bad, make the person who they are in the best way, and really important.
Yeah, I think, in some ways, memory is just our life, but held in. So they do make us what we are, and I might even be willing to go a little bit further in some sense. There's a way in which memory is, it is us. The thing about memory is it's a way that we can hold in time something that is temporal. So it's like, the thing about memory is it's a way of taking an event in time and holding it fixed so that it becomes kind of quasi-eternal, but within kind of the temporal order, right? So I kind of see memory as the closest thing you can get to an experience of eternity within time. It's like a temporal experience of eternity because it takes temporal events and it kind of fixes them. And I think specifically, so it's not just that fact, but it also is sort of specifically about the good. So I think memory isn't just for like holding just something that has happened. Like there was an ant that crossed the street, not like Aunt Judy, but like a little crawling ant. And be like, oh, I'm going to remember that. I think memory is linked up with the good. It's like we remember things because of their relation to the good, either because they greatly participate in the good, or because they greatly deviate from the good. And so, like we can remember things that are far from the ideal, and we can remember things that are close to the ideal. But it's like the good is what is operative in why we remember things and why we forget things. And at least I sort of want to say that. I think that's true. Okay, and it can. This I think is unique to the novel as such, because at the very end, you have Alyosha talking about this speech at the stone, and the stone. I think this is a Platonic book, novel. The stone and not just the stone, but a lot in this book takes on like a sacramental character. By sacramental, I sort of mean like in like a theological context, but what I mean more so than like any specific like sacrament like type of thing, I mean it conveys a meaning beyond itself. It's like the stone ceases to be simply a stone, and it ceases to be simply a stone because of memory, because of the fact that Alyosha remembers, as he says at the very beginning of this little speech, he remembers the conversation that he had with Snegurion when he told him about Ilusha and himself, and Ilusha was crying, "Papa, Papa, how he humiliated you." This rose at once in Alyosha's memory, and it shook him. And then he decided to give this speech to the boys, and so I think what memory can do is it kind of has the ability to like sacramentalize things, because it can take it can like take two things that are kind of disjointed and it can wed them together. And what's awesome about this is it can be such an insignificant thing, like a stone, an onion, a pound of nuts. It's like, these are just insignificant little nothings. But it's only in memory that they become sacramentals. They actually, a pound of nuts doesn't just weigh a pound of nuts. This is like poetry here. A pound of nuts weighs infinite amounts. Right, that's like that book, that kid's book, The Weight of the Mass, which I read. But the basic idea is the pound of nuts, the onion, all these things symbolize something more than them, and it's like in memory that we're able to hold this vague meaning, like forgiveness, love. And it can even go on the other side of things. I mean, the negative side, it could be like the things that you remember that are painful. It's like memory takes in particular concrete symbols, and it holds those symbols so that you can have a continued awareness of these universal eternal truths. And so memory is like what gives you access kind of continually to these universal truths because of the actual particular experiences you have. And so this is why, not just for this book, but I think for Platonic thought in general, memory plays this a really important role, because memory is kind of the link between the fleeting and what's eternal. It's remember the analogy or the allegory of the cave with the shadows, and you look at the shadows and you're like recollecting, you're remembering, or you're being able to see that they mean something else, and they kind of point you to something else. And so you look at the onion and it means something else. It means something more than just an onion. Yeah, does that make sense? It's hard for me now to look at an onion. I actually was really close to going over to the Shinkevich's yesterday. We were making a pumpkin soup. It was really good. It was a really good pumpkin soup. But we were supposed to have onions for the soup, pretty key ingredient, but we didn't. They said if you're in a pinch, you can substitute onion powder, and we were in a pinch. We're always in a pinch in our house, and so we decided to use onion powder. But I was really close to going over and asking for an onion of Dr. Shinkevich. And if you know anything about Dr. Shinkevich and the Brothers Karamazov, he knows that when I ask for an onion, it's not just like that can't just go without comment. And so I knew like he would probably go to the store and buy me an onion if he didn't have one. So I it was kind of late in the day, and I thought we'll just use onion powder. Anyway, so but even like it even can become these really insignificant things mean a lot, and what's specific about childhood and memory, as Alyosha goes on to describe it, we can read some of it if you want, but the idea is children have experiences that they don't quite understand the significance of them, but yet memory holds those experiences until time comes for the meaning to be revealed to them. This is like Plato on music, right? Here's a concrete example of this. The hardest part about teaching philosophy is it's so easy for me to like turn on the hot air balloon and just like start floating above the clouds, and so it's always good to sort of be brought back to the ground, and that always happens for me during dinner time in my house, because it's a chaotic time. But one of the few moments this month of being able to have a conversation over dinner with my family was last night over pumpkin soup, and we I don't know how we got into this topic, but we were talking about the kids who were wanting to know about the things we did wrong when we were kids. Like, what were some of the things you did that were wrong when you were kids? Which is always a great topic of conversation with kids. And they're like, And so my wife told the story about how she was teaching her sister to kick a soccer ball, and she like drop kicked the soccer ball and it went through the front window. Right then, her ride to soccer practice came, so she jumped to the car and left. Now my father-in-law very upset at home with a broken window. And then the time that she tried to pick the vacuum up to lift it over her sister's head when she was laying on the ground, the vacuum was, and then the hair went, and then she just left her and ran away. Which there's like a theme, it seems, in her childhood, of like running away from problems. But so then I started sharing my own awesome, stories of childhood, which I'm sure you can all think about your own awesome stories of childhood. And when you think about these, they're like great moments of like guilt, but there's also something strange about when you look back on it with memory. Even if they're really painful things, it's not that you like can laugh about some of these things, but the meaning of it kind of slowly starts to change over time, and I'll give you some examples of this in a bit. But anyway, where this transpired was they eventually said, "Oh, just tell us some other stories, any story." And we're trying to dig up like what's appropriate to talk to your kids about over dinner, like about your childhood like mishaps, and like I shouldn't tell them that I'm a felon or almost. I'm not a felon, but almost. Like I don't know, maybe not right now. I don't know. It's pumpkin soup. Maybe we gotta wait for something else. But so we decided to call it quits on like just the deviancies of our childhood. And then they just said, just tell us any story. Just tell us some stories of your childhood, which was kind of cool just to see that they were really wanting us to just share more about us being kids. And I was like, okay. And I just started talking about how I lived near a gas station growing up, and I could walk down to the gas station over the summer and buy like a slushie for 50 cents or whatever. And my son like lit up. He's like, oh, I love slushies. And I was kind of like, we don't typically go to the gas station and get slushies. And he said, do you remember when we went to that hotel and it was late and you got us a slushie? And I had to dig down deep. But it was in Kimball, Tennessee, a couple of years ago. We were driving down to Florida, and it was a lot later than we were wanting to. And we told the kids, because it's been such a long drive and nerves and stress has been real high, we'll get you ice cream. But we couldn't find a place to get ice cream. And so we went to this little gas station, and they had slushies, which I thought was close to ice cream. There's the ice part of a slushie, right? And so I got the slushie, and completely fell into the back recesses of my mind, and was getting ready to just turn to dust in about another 5 years. I don't think I would have remembered it. Except for my son brought it up, which was incredible that like that meant something very significant to him. That like the word slushy like brought him back to that experience, right? So this is I think what Alyosha is trying to say about Ilusha, and about the stone, and about probably the Dostoevsky, ultimately about all events in life. On the surface, they're so insignificant. Your life is so insignificant on the surface, right? I mean, I hate to say it. Most of the actions you do, it's like they come and they go, and it's as if you're just going through the grind, and another day passes, and it all just sort of like fades away. And your life eventually, when you 80 years from now, it's going to fade away. And what's being pointed out, though, is, and this is why I think it ends with this reference to this memory eternal. God is this memory eternal. And it's as if all of these little tiny events, buying a slushie for my son, giving an onion to a beggar, you can come up with your own little tiny experiences through life where you do this, that on the surface they seem so insignificant, but they become the way that little tiny forgetful creatures like humans can latch onto and hold on to for their entire life the eternal thing that they are representative of. So it's kind of like you get these small little things, and you hold on to those small little things, in memory, and they become your access point, so to speak, into the divine, the divine love, the divine good. It's these little created goods and experience and memory of those that kind of continually give you access to that, which is on the philosophical level, like that's purely just like kind of Platonic philosophical stuff. But that's ultimately what the sacraments in theological context is intended to do. It's like these insignificant things, right? It's just this matter, these words, these little insignificant things somehow give you access into the very heart of eternity. And I think this is what Alyosha is trying to say here is, if you forget about the insignificant events in life that kind of gave an hour joy, then like your whole life will like if you can't remember the small little things in life that gave life joy, then your life as a whole will kind of be void of joy, because the way you have that on the whole is kind of in each individual particular thing. And so memory can blow things out of proportion, and that's not like an unjust false view of things. It's like my son's view of the slushy is a more accurate memory of the slushy than mine, because I could say, oh no, it wasn't that significant, it wasn't that important, you're like blowing it out of proportion. But it actually turns out that like he remembers it not simply for the fact that it was just a slushy late in the evening, but it kind of meant something of great goodness, which is like what he latched on through the slushy, right? And so it's like, otherwise, I mean, he doesn't remember the Milky Ways that he eats, even though maybe not Milky Way, I'm thinking like I don't think it's some sort of really tasty food that he would like more than a slushy.
Pumpkin soup.
Pumpkin soup. Maybe not. He didn't like it that much. I don't know. But there's like a bowl of ice cream or something. But there was something specific to that context that made that memorable to him, and it's something beyond just the surface that makes it memorable. You have to have the surface stuff, but it's more than just the surface stuff. Yeah, I don't know. Does that make sense? Questions about that? Comments about that? I think this is why you have these figures who have a lot of memories, bad memories. They also have a couple good memories, and I think what Dostoevsky's trying to say is, if you just have one good memory of someone loving you, that is sufficient to fully communicate the eternal, divine love. Now, it's not in its complete form, but that's enough to give you access to an encounter with that divine love. And it was just through this simple fact that this doctor gave a pound of nuts, right? And I think part of the idea is to be able to both recall how you have had those experiences, but also recognize that you're responsible for those experiences in other people. So like your actions seem to be fleeting, but because they have to do with the relationship with other human beings, they become like quasi-eternalized in their memory. So they become there's this great responsibility that's placed on you when you recognize that, buying a slushie might be what like makes my son remember. Now there's other things. That's not the only good thing I've done for my son. There's like 3 other things I think I've done. But that's one of them. And if that's what makes him remember the love that his father has for him, but he forgets everything else, but he holds on to that, like that's enough. That's all he really needs, right? Now hopefully there's other things, but the idea is you just have to have one. And which one is going to be the thing that someone holds on to? You don't know, and you can't control. Why do you remember some things and not others? It's sort of this great mystery, but it has to do with a lot of it has to do with other people's actions. And once again, it goes both ways. It's not just cherries on top of the ice cream sundae, because the ways that you completely harm and cripple people comes through that exact same avenue of memory, right? Memory is really what leads people to real heavy, like insight into reality. It becomes the case where we recognize the complete brokenness of our lives, but at the same time a recollection of like the fulfillment of our lives, and you can have both those things being brought through memory. Okay. Comments, questions about that? There's a few other things I want to say about memory, because what Dostoevsky is doing here, I think, is it's very Platonic, but it's yeah. I think he's trying to sacramentalize the world, so that when you see, I mean, I think he said this. I think it's in The Idiot. Beauty will save the world. And this, I think, is that's like what he means. This idea is what he means. It's these small things become the saviors of the world, because they become the things that lead us into, and this is what beauty ultimately is, leads us into something beyond them. They mean something. The stone means more than a stone. The onion means more than the onion. Right? The onion saves. How can the onion save you? It's just an onion. It might save the pumpkin soup, but how can it save your soul? And I think it's because it's got wrapped up into this act of love, and so then you see the onion as something that has eternal weight to it. And you can think of other examples, which I recommend you do for your own life. Okay. Questions about anything here at the end, the book as a whole, and they don't have to be questions like specifics about the book, but just questions about very broad things related to the class or the book, thematically, right? Yeah.
You were saying that you had like atheist teachers you said who said that this was their favorite book.
Yeah.
And I was just curious, like, why? Is it just that one passage from Ivan, or is there other stuff?
Yeah, that's typically why. Most people who say this is one of their favorite books don't really read the whole thing. It's not a good idea to make a claim on a book without reading the whole thing. But I have known people that have read the whole thing that have liked it, and they have been atheists. And I think part of the reason is because they recognize that the depiction of God and of Christianity and what have you in this book is one that has to take very seriously the question of God. Because I think, unfortunately, a lot of times what we like to do is we like to think, one way I can be confirmed in believing that God exists is not to think that it's really a question in the first place. I already know the answer, and now I'm just like saying I'm entertaining the question and or asking the question, but one's really not. And so I think what the book does is it kind of like strips you of a lot of what you want to hold on to in Christianity, and it does that for the sake of you being able to actually approach it and find it for its like real meaning, its real value, rather than some self-imposed value. And I think one of the great tendencies that people have, that I think Dostoevsky is trying to avoid, is like if you go to Christianity in hopes that it'll avoid pain and suffering, and that you're going to the wrong place, right? Don't go to Christianity if you're looking to have a way out of pain and suffering and death. This is like precisely the focal point of pain, suffering, and death, right? It's like where God went, right there into the heart of pain, suffering, and death. And so if you kind of think Christianity is going to alleviate that, I think what this is trying to say is you're wrong. And so I think people who are atheists kind of like that it's a little jostling, and that it at least is a rejection of a type of Christianity that is as it's kind of put implicitly here, kind of, and it's another way that it's put in other works about Dostoevsky. It's like a crystal palace that everything gets fitted perfectly, and there's no ugliness and there's no pain, and everything just, it's like smiles and Saturday morning cartoons, and like everything is just so wonderful. And I think it says that can't be Christianity, and so I think a lot of people who are Christians don't know what Christianity would be unless it were something like that, like a way of being alleviated from the fear of death. And I think what this is saying is you can be alleviated from the fear of death, but it doesn't make death any less painful and agonizing and things like that. So I don't know if that and personally, why it's one of my favorite books is because it's done that for me. It's had that effect on me. It has made me have a more human approach to the questions of God and immortality and Christianity. I can completely sympathize with people who say, yeah, I don't believe in God, and then they talk about this horrible thing that happened in their life, and I don't want to say, oh no, you're wrong. You're just there's still something I think that they're missing, but I can kind of sympathize with that. Not that I like agree, but it's kind of like when you really get down to the depths, you realize how difficult of a moral, I guess you just call it moral, psychological, how serious of an issue this is, that you can't just give it an easy answer. And so there's a little bit of like a patience that I have in recognizing the ways that people struggle to answer these questions when they're really searching for the answers to these questions. And I have I actually have more respect for people like that than people that overly easily answer the question without really appreciating the depth of it. Does that make sense? And so this takes all the questions very, very, very seriously. And then there's this risk because you find yourself asking these questions, and you might even be like even more confused and more confused afterwards. But I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. Okay. Yeah.
So with that, I think a lot of memory is associated with negative things, and like with trauma and fears and things like that. So how can you, like when you have a negative memory, do you just let it be negative, or do you try to like find the good that comes out of it? Like do you try to convince yourself that it is good in some way?
Yeah. So and this can only be like verified as true through your own experiences, and it's when we're dealing with moral questions in the broad sense of moral, that you don't want to prematurely judge the significance of an event in your life until it's been brought to complete fruition. It's like you plant a tomato seed, and after about 4 weeks, you get this little tiny thing, and you're like, man, tomato plants suck. They don't give you tomatoes. Where's the tomato, right? And you're looking, and it's like, I have to be patient. It's gonna come. It's gonna cost. You gotta water it. It's kind of a pain to do all the work, but there's this sort of trust, this hope that it's gonna bear fruit in due season. And I think part of the problem for me. And probably for a lot of people, is that we have these experiences that are traumatizing, that are really painful experiences, and we want to make a judgment on those and say, God looked on the world and he said, it's all good, but how can any good come of this? And the radical thing about Christianity, which I think this book is presenting in kind of human terms, is that it dares to hope that all things can work for the good. And here's how I think this can happen. Now, you might not see it in a particular, like if you have a particular traumatizing, painful, memory, and you say, I don't see any good of this, and you might not see the good. It might take a long time. The good, I don't want to theorize about this, but I'll just use an example from something we've already talked about in class. Early in the middle of the book, we talked about Zosima and Zosima's admiration of Mary of Egypt, right? And I don't know if I read it. I read some of the story and I sent it out. And hopefully, if you haven't, you should read the whole thing. It's worth reading cover to cover. But the thing about Mary of Egypt is that she is able to live that monastic desert life, not because she thinks she has been proven worthy of it, that she has the virtue. It's like one of the greatest crippling aspects of living a fulfilled life is to think that we have so much virtue that we don't need anyone, especially God. And it's kind of like if I can develop in such a way, I almost don't need God anymore because I have all of the great qualities. The thing about we'll just call it brokenness is how I want to put it. Are there two ends in brokenness? My intellect's been broken by the fall, so the spelling's a little off. The thing about brokenness is that it reminds of a need. If you forget that you are a sinner, you won't really feel the need for God. It's like the great paradox of all of this is that we really come to understand the need for God when we come to understand that our lives without God are in shambles. And so there's something good about our lives being in shambles. I don't want to say it's good that our lives are in shambles, like as an end in itself, but it's like it's this constant restless impetus for something else. And so when you have all of these experiences in your life, and they're remembered, and you feel completely crushed by these, and it could be, it could be both, in both ways, things that have happened to you or things that you've done. But I think at the very least, what those have in common is that it constitutes a reminder, a felt need for something, I'll just call it, what would be the opposite of that is something like recovery or health or what's the justice, right? Wholeness, right? This is how we began the class. Brokenness is the experience of being unjust, incomplete, and it's almost like regardless of how much virtue you have, you're still broken. You're still incomplete. And the oddity of this is sometimes the more virtue we have, the more we are inclined to think that we're not broken, and therefore we don't need anything else. And so it's like the broken people are the people that feel that they need something else. They need to be brought to this. Going back to Mary of Egypt, it was the fact that she remembered, how long had she been in the desert, 40 years or whatever. The fact that she still remembered, the taste of the wine that she had, and right, she has these memories of this depraved life, right, that persist. And it's kind of like, in one sense, we want to forget these things, but these are the things that underlie this, the original kind of movement from being fallen to being whole. And now it's not simply like the thing about reminding yourself or thinking about yourself as you could call it a sinner or broken or whatever. It's not an end in itself. It actually becomes this ability to, to recognize that there is, it's like, I don't know how to do this. That that which is whole, that which is just, has partaken in injustice without being unjust, right? That which is perfect fulfillment has entered into the world of unfulfillment, so that the experience of brokenness can be now an experience which is good, because it's an experience of the love that this has for us. Because this is now not just an experience of distance from God. This actually becomes an experience of the ultimate intimacy with God, because this is precisely not in the sense that God sinned, right? That justice has become unjust, but it's that all of those existential feelings of brokenness have been taken on by this, so that it's not a way of saying I'm far from something, but that becomes the experience of, in Christian terms, of the crucifixion, of the cross. It's the intimacy with God, and that is something that it's kind of like you kind of wish you could forget about the fact that God died on the cross. That was like a really bad thing to happen. It's like, oh yeah, we shouldn't have done that. But it now becomes like a sacramental thing, and that it becomes the revelation, the presence of love. So when you see that, you think of love. And I think the way that I don't want to say the way to think of it, but it's this experience can be seen as a participation in this. It doesn't remove the pain. It doesn't make it any less broken, but it now becomes an experience of the death that the wholeness suffered. I don't know if that kind of makes sense. And so, putting it in these terms, and I got to shut up because you got to judge me. The evil doesn't cease to be evil, but it starts to work for the good. This is like the power of God and the providence of God, that the evil can work towards or for the good because it sort of like is evil, or it's broken. It's like distance from God becomes a way of realizing God's presence when you realize that God, in one sense, this is like the radicality of the incarnation. I don't want to say this in too strong terms, but just sort of this like speculation that like that God in some ways distanced himself from himself. This is the cry on the cross of my God, why have you forsaken me? It's like that now becomes the experience of God's love, in that he was willing to be obedient to the point of death, right? And even in like Platonic terms, you have this strange thing that the good somehow, it's not to that extent, but that the good somehow is even seen in the cave, in the darkness. It's like, why is that? Other than the fact that somehow now the shadows become good. The shadows become representative of something. Brokenness becomes representative of something. Pain, suffering becomes representative of something. And what is it? I think what it becomes representative of is ultimately the intensity of love that God has for us because of and this is why the incarnation is such an important thing for Christianity, because it was primarily to take that suffering on first, so that when we suffer that brokenness, it doesn't give us rise to rebellion against God, but it actually lets us participate in what he's already done. He's already suffered that. And so now it becomes an experience of the love that God has for us rather than this distance and source of rebellion against God. Anyway, that I think is evil serving good without ceasing to be evil. It's a really mysterious thing. And that's why it's so important to remember that you are broken and you're a sinner. Not that that's in and of itself a good thing, but it becomes, just as like the death of God is not in and of itself a good thing, but it oddly becomes good in a way.